Good morning, everybody. I'm here with Brooks Shannon. He's the VP of GIS at RapidDeploy. You're in the Diamond Hall vendor session. Excuse me. I'm going to let you introduce yourself, Brooks, and we'll go from there.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it, and welcome everybody. I'm super excited to be here, and it's just a treat to be part of what Ricardo and everybody have really done to, I think, honor and celebrate what so many incredibly talented and passionate people do every single day within 911. My name is Brooks Shannon. Again, I'm VP of GIS here at RapidDeploy, and what I'm going to do today is talk about the future of mapping, which is a pretty passionate subject of mine. Some of you who know me know that I've been in the industry for a little while, and I'll talk about that in a second. But what I want to talk about today is how mapping in the 911 center and the PSAP, and even outside of the PSAP as you extend into the first response area, is changing, and why it's changing and where it's heading, and kind of give a glimpse of the future and what we're doing at RapidDeploy to help make that future a reality. So let me talk a little bit about my background just to level set, and before we go ahead and really talk about the content here that I want to share with you today. I've worked in public safety for 17 years. Unfortunately, never as a practitioner, although I briefly thought about getting into volunteer fire service, and I might still do that. I still feel like it would be really rewarding to be able to do something like that. But I've always been behind a desk. I started writing software. Fresh out of college, I got hired by a firm up in Bismarck, North Dakota, who it was a civil engineering company, but they had this little fledgling 911 and GIS division, and I joined that group shortly after joining the company to build a map, to recreate a product that they sold that was getting deployed right around the time that phase 2 was getting implemented in a lot of rural parts of the country. And I didn't know a single thing about 911. I had no idea who Annie and Allie were. I had no idea what those things were at all. And I learned a lot of stuff by osmosis, right? Like anything in 911, you can't just go pick up a book off the shelf, 911 for Dummies. That stuff just doesn't exist. But I really took to it. Working on 911 maps in particular, and helping people locate callers in some of the worst moments of their lives, was really, really powerful for me, and really remains so. I mean, some of the very first 911 calls I ever heard were, some of them were pretty benign, right? I remember there was a call out in Hot Springs County, Wyoming, where a gal called. This is one of the very first calls I ever heard. It was a live 911 call. Gal calls to complain because she wants the squirrels off her front porch. We've all heard calls like that. But when you hear a call where it's a frantic mother who dialed 911 because she went in the back bedroom to check on her daughter and found her infant baby daughter in the crib, blue, that stops you in your tracks. And I knew that this was where I needed to be, because the things that I could do, humble as they were, could make such an impact to the people that are calling on those worst days of their lives, and maybe even the people who need the squirrels off their front porch. So I wrote software for maybe 13, 14 years, building 911 PSAT mapping applications, building GIS data editing tools, getting involved in that whole next generation 911 thing, really with a focus always on GIS. And then about 7 years ago, I started getting into product management, which I've been doing for some time sort of informally. I visited probably about, at this point, about 200 PSAPs. So, I mean, scratching the surface in the US, but still quite a few PSAPs. Many of those I installed our software at. I taught training courses. I got to understand how telecommunicators tick, the work environment that they live and breathe in every single day, the things that they have to do. And I really got excited about being able to better understand the things that we could do to help them from a software perspective, and better understand how we could take something like GIS and mapping and accurate location and fuse all those things together with additional communication tools to really just give telecommunicators more tools in the toolbox of the things that they already use today. For me, it's never been about replacing the stuff that folks use, right? Or automating things, what have you. It's about just giving more tools to someone who can use them in the time of need and providing more information, more functionality, more opportunities to provide some really great response. So I do that here at RapidDeploy. I work on a product called Radius, which I'm going to talk a lot about today. That's our cloud-hosted, cloud-native 911 PSAT mapping application, and so much more. And I'll talk about how that's changing. Reinhard talked a little bit about that just a moment ago, if you happen to be in his opening session, and I'll expand on some of the things that he said. And I'll also talk about where we're heading from an industry perspective. I spend a lot of time within standards organizations like NINA, the National Emergency Number Association, and ENA, the European Emergency Number Association, helping work on standards for interoperability and making sure that systems can all play nicely together in the sandbox, which means that when you, for example, take a call from one agency that's transferred to you, you're going to get all the data that you need, including location. So I'll talk about how all of those trends are driving changes. I'll talk about how RapidDeploy is embracing some of those changes and also kind of lighting a fire underneath everything to make those changes happen. And then I'll talk about what the future holds. And from a perspective of questions, feel free to ask anything you'd like. If we're not able to get to questions at the end of the presentation today, I have my email address at the end. It's a little bit more complex than Reinhard's with his little r at rapiddeploy.com, but I would very much welcome anybody with any questions to reach out to me at that time. So let's talk about today's 911 mapping. For a lot of us, we know what that's like. It's been a long time since I've been at a 911 center that doesn't have some form of digital map. But let's talk about what it is and what it's not to level set. So in today's common mapping landscape, as I was thinking about this, in my experience, I think there's four ways, at least, that it kind of breaks down. You can summarize it by saying that mapping is decentralized. Without modern technology and reliable network connectivity, it's really common for maps to be deployed to each and every computer or mobile device that uses them. What that means is that it means it's hard to update those maps really frequently. I've been to some large 911 centers that only update their maps, if they're lucky, once a quarter or twice a year, or maybe even only once a year, because they don't have a server infrastructure behind it with reliable connectivity to use that data essentially live. They literally, like back in the day, go around to every workstation with a removable hard drive or a flash drive, stick it in the USB port, and copy files onto the computer. And certainly some centers have server-based infrastructures, and some centers have data distribution systems to handle this. But by and large, a lot of the mapping that's out in the world today still runs on this decentralized model, which means maps are stale. If there's construction in an area, there's a new road put in, who knows how long it's going to take for that new road or the set of addresses along that road to be updated within the map. I mean, it could be months, and in public safety, that's just not good enough. If the address on the alley or the lat long can tell us where someone is, but we don't have an accurate map to sit underneath that point, what is the point? Data also exists in silos. You may have one version of the map in your PSAP. You may have another version of the map in the vehicles, and it might even be older. And you may have another version of your map on your mobile devices if you're using some kind of a mobile app. And there's a few out there, whether or not it's a mobile app paired to your CAD or a mobile app that you are using as a companion to your CAD. That data is usually updated at different times in different cadences. So maybe you get updates once a month in your PSAP, maybe even more frequently than that. Some companies I know will do it every day. But the vehicles might be out of date. That's not very awesome. Maps, by and large, are also indoors. Today's outdoor maps are pretty good outdoors. There have been a lot of GIS organizations at city and local levels who have put in a tremendous amount of time, driven in large part by the push to next generation 911, but just on their own card with proper funding to get outdoor maps and addressing data super, super accurate. hitting that Nina recommended 98% match rate with the MSAG. But rarely, if ever, do those agencies have indoor map data on the maps that are used in the 911 center. That can leave telecommunicators and first responders at a big disadvantage. You may not need indoor maps for every single one of your buildings. 3-bedroom house, not a big deal. But if you have a large school, if you have a large shopping mall, if you have a large government center, if you have commercial infrastructure where indoor maps might be useful, maybe it's a ethanol plant in the Midwest, what have you, having that additional detail, especially for first responders, but certainly for frontline telecommunicators as well, is really handy to have. Right now, those PSAT maps are at a disadvantage. And those maps are nearly universally 2 dimensions. They're flat, they're 2-dimensional representations of the world, but 911 callers don't always call from the surface of the earth. We know that the majority of 911 calls come in today from cell phones. It's the device that people have in their pockets when they experience an emergency, right? Over half of those calls are made indoors. And if you're in an urban environment where you have a multi-story building and someone dials 911, who knows where they really truly are. Literally right now, I'm in Austin, Texas, working from my home office due to our COVID situation. And I live in an apartment complex right now that has 3 buildings. One is 5 stories, one's 4, and I'm in the one with 3 stories. If I got a phase 2 location, it's hard to say exactly how accurate here it would even be. It's probably within about a block or 2 radius. They certainly wouldn't know which building I'm in, much less which floor. Having the ability to have some elevation awareness to maps would be really, really nice. And I'll talk about how we can get there. So let's talk about what's driving some of that change. Just riffing off of the scenario that I just talked about, we have an ever increasingly mobile and connected public that really truly expects 911 to know their exact location in their moment of need. I remember a situation a few years back where I was shared a text to 911 call. Not a lot of those are ever made, but this was a really interesting scenario to me. This gentleman texts 911 and he says, I'm riding in a car with my friend. I'm drunk. He's drunker and he's the one driving. I don't want to call 911 because I'm afraid that, of what he'll do, right? Don't want him to get mad. So I'm texting. I want you to pull him over. So the telecommunicator naturally asks, what's the location of your emergency? Where are you? And I'm looking at the chat logs and you can see he's like, well, what do you mean you don't know where I am? There's that expectation that we just know, right? So if someone dials 911 and we see it on a traditional map on the left-hand side, in an urban environment, you may have a really good wireless phase 2 uncertainty or something that's not very good. In this example, who knows? They could be in any one of those buildings downtown. We certainly don't know right now that that caller is calling from the Independent, otherwise known as the Jenga Tower, at 301 West Avenue, Unit 4408 on the 44th floor. So because of public perception and the need to continue to provide higher quality response all the time, instead of just saying it's good enough, let's stop evolving, we know that we can do better and we have to do better. So there's a number of things that have been happening in industry to kind of coalesce and move this forward. The first is really the work that the FCC and others in the private sector have been doing to improve location accuracy. The FCC recently released their 6th report and order on wireless location accuracy, which imposes requirements for Z-axis or elevation data accuracy. So such that by April 3rd, 2021, the top 25 cellular market areas, so like the top 25 metro areas in the country, will start receiving Z-axis information for 80% of the wireless calls with plus or minus 3 meters of uncertainty. That's a really big deal. And I have to strongly applaud the FCC for doing this because it really truly acts as um, a tremendous catalyst for inducing change and getting the private sector to rally behind it and put some technology that's already been in place, in some of the commercial spaces to use for 911. Companies like Apple, companies like Google, companies like NextNav, et cetera, are doing some really tremendous work in this space. You combine that with ubiquitous, reliable IP connectivity, whether or not that's through fiber or microwave or satellite or LTE with FirstNet and other solutions that are provided by other connectivity providers. That gives us the ability to actually grab this data and share this data and communicate with other agencies to actually truly interoperate, and to do that over a framework that has been defined by organizations like NINA, who develop standards that facilitate this interoperability. There are no standards police, but if vendors are adherent to the standards help make sure that those vendor solutions can talk to one another and play nice together in the sandbox, and make sure that if we do get an accurate location with the z-axis coordinate, and we do have ubiquitous connectivity, that we could handle these calls if we've evacuated a PSAP and we need to start transferring calls, or if we are providing relief for that agency, that we can do all of this stuff together. So based on those forcing functions, right, those things that are happening within the industry, now what? Based on that, 911 mapping really kind of has to evolve to leverage all of this. But what I want to talk about today is how at RapidDeploy, we're helping to lead that charge, not just from participation within standards bodies and driving this forward, but literally rubber hitting the road today with our products. And I want to talk about specifically our Radius product. To bring it back to the beginning of the presentation where I talked about how mapping really happened in the past and where it's heading today, it's important, I think, to recognize that through these changes, 911 mapping, can, should, and must really move to the center of the 911 call taking workflow. In the past, certainly when I started back in 2003, it was all about displaying as accurate a location as we could get for a 911 caller. Often that was phase one, but as we started implementing phase two out in parts of the country, again, that was really when I was kind of getting up to speed with public safety in my career. It was all about taking that more accurate information, showing it on a map, integrating it with locally authoritative GIS data produced by the city or county or the state, and if possible, taking supplemental data feeds, maybe like live weather data, watches and warning information from National Weather Service, et cetera, and throwing that all on a map, which is really, really useful. But let's fast forward to where we are today. Today, we're in a place where we can and we do display real-time caller location before the call ever rings at a PSAP. And I'll talk about that in a moment, expanding on what Reinhard shared during the opening session. We'll talk about how we can have awareness about calls in our PSAP's service area that have actually been answered by different PSAPs in misroute scenarios, and in scenarios maybe where we have a small slice of our service area handled by another agency. California Highway Patrol is always the classic example of that. And we'll talk about how we can display additional data from trustworthy sources, like Apple Medical ID, device language, and information that can be provided by customers who might use the solutions like Rave's Smart 911 product. Then we'll talk about the future, where we might be able to display emergency requests from different sources and channels, not just Google and Apple cell phones, where we can intelligently correlate that information together to give a unified incident view. It's that kind of mythical common operating picture map that we've been talking about for years, but really making it a reality, providing situational awareness far beyond the 911 call itself, tying into historical data and tying into data that other agencies may have made available for us. using machine learning and artificial intelligence to provide decision-making support and maybe do some predictive analytics. Again, not replacing anything, but augmenting all of the experience that telecommunicators have and all of the tools they currently have to give them just a little bit more of a leg up on what incidents may be taking place and the nature of those incidents. So again, it's all about PSAT mapping evolving and really moving towards the center of that 911 call taker workflow, where it's not just this auxiliary thing on the side that shows a caller location, a little pin, you look at it, you move on, but it becomes really a core centerpiece to the way that we work with emergency callers. So let's talk about our Radius product. Before we get to talking about what we're doing at RapidDeploy with Apple and with Google, and also with some of the other partners that Reinhard talked about, like the alarm company ADT and Rave Mobile Safety and others, I want to talk about specifically Radius itself and what Radius does. Radius on the surface looks just like a garden variety 911 PSAT mapping application. Very cleanly designed on purpose to be really approachable, really easy to use. And Radius is all about showing the location of 911 callers with enriched GIS data and correlating the locations of callers from a different variety of sources. So if we just have a look at the screenshot that I provided, what this represents is a 911 caller calling from an Apple iPhone in Santa Cruz, California, with 3 location pins shown on the map. 1 blue pin, 2 red pins. The blue pin represents traditional anti-alley location. In this case, it's wireless phase 1 location. That's why the radius is so large and covers such a large area of Santa Cruz itself. But we see 2 other little pins, these little red pins. Those little red pins represent actual device-based hybrid location coming from the Apple iPhone itself. And not only can that be much more accurate and high quality, in this case, this signal, as we call it, actually only has an uncertainty of 5 meters. That's really, really good. That's certainly better than 1,700 meters with that phase 1 location. But it can come in with altitude information. It can come in with information about what kind of call it is. Is it a voice call? Is it an SMS call? And it can come in with a lot of rich additional information like medical ID information, which we'll talk about just a little bit. But without anything beyond a caller dialing 911, we can see their location, we can see all of this information, and we can overlay it on top of really rich maps. In fact, the map that you see here is a map that Santa Cruz County, California published freely for use on Esri's ArcGIS online cloud GIS data hosting and sharing solution. It's a map of 500-year and 100-year floodplains from FEMA that they've made available and stylized in such a way that they can be used all over the place, including a 911 center. And that's one of the really cool things about Radius, is that it's web-based, cloud-delivered, cloud-hosted, and it has that connectivity up to the cloud and up to other kinds of clouds, to where we can bring in maps that are available on a platform like ArcGIS Online with an incredibly little amount of configuration. Once you know which web map you want to add, this literally, I think, takes maybe 25 seconds to do, to configure Radius, to use that, and almost magically, all of the workstations that are at a particular PSAP have access to that. They can turn it on and they can see this really rich content. That's really cool. So even just before talking about Apple integration, Google integration, Rave, OnStar, ADT, etc., all of these things combined just now are really useful. We're helping break down mapping data silos, and we're fusing information together. As you zoom in, you can see the fact that how accurate those locations can be. In this case, that device-based hybrid location from Apple with 5 meters of uncertainty. And we can see in practice how powerful it can be fusing that information with something like that floodplain map to see that not only is that person calling from a location that it is in the 100-year floodplain, they're actually in the 500-year floodplain too. So not a good situation. Certainly if there's a flood going on, this gives you a little bit of a leg up for situational awareness. So we can do a lot of other really interesting things in Radius. If you have a caller that dials 911, in this case from a compatible Google Android device, we can see the location update just every few seconds. With Google, it's every 5 seconds. We can see them drive around during that 911 call. Your 911 CPE call handling system may only do one automatic rebid based on its configuration, but we can show these locations as soon as someone dials 911, before the phone even rings, and all the way throughout that call, giving you some really great real-time situational awareness. We can bring in a lot of really rich live content, like live traffic, live Waze incident information, as well as live traffic cameras. The state of Maryland, Maryland DOT actually published out a GIS layer that they themselves host of live traffic cameras that synchronizes to their network of live traffic cameras. So anywhere along the freeways of Maryland, you can click a little dot on the map and you can have a view of what might be taking place out there. And this is a screenshot that I just happened to capture one day where I noticed that there was this little spot of orange and red slow moving traffic on the live traffic layer. And I thought, oh, let's have a look at the traffic cameras and see what's going on. And sure enough, there was an accident that was backing up traffic. And just a really interesting example of taking, multiple pieces of data from multiple sources, fusing them together to derive awareness that you didn't have before. Last but not least, I want to show something really cool, I think, which is our ability to leverage custom content like that Santa Cruz floodplain layer in the form of something really special called an Azure Webmap. And a web map is really just, think of it like a base map within your product where it's composed of different layers and stuff. But it comes along with this really rich presentation and analysis functionality. So for example, there's a web app that exists that demonstrates how you could visualize crime data. And you can do that through interactive line charts, bar charts, pie charts, etc., which is great. You can get at a lot of really interesting data that way. In fact, that's how we built live COVID-19 statistical data and live wildfire statistic data into our Radius product, just by using this Azure Webmap functionality, where again, it takes about 25 seconds to configure it as an available base map, and at the snap of your fingers, you have this available within the whole platform. And this is just something that didn't exist in those days, where you had to run around to each workstation with a flash drive and stick it in a computer and copy files to update your map data. That just doesn't work. But there's something really special about this slide and this screenshot that I want to talk about, because this is where we start to depart from PSAT mapping and we turn it into something bigger. And we take PSAT mapping from that periphery, that monitor on the side, and bring it a little more closer to the center of the workflow. And that is because we offer two-way SMS chat capability within our platform. So a lot of us have heard about text to 911. This is also something that we may have heard about called text from 911. I know Ricardo is particularly passionate about that, and a lot of other folks are as well. The ability to reach out to someone who may have contacted 911 through a voice call and contact them via SMS instead. Maybe it's an abandoned call. Maybe they called 911 and we could hear something happening in the background. Maybe there's some shouting, some screaming, and then the line goes dead. And we can't actually get a voice call established. We're trying to call, they're not answering. It's another pathway to reach out. What's special about this, not only is the fact that it's inside of a PSAT mapping application, so we have all the ability to have a really enriched map display with all of this authoritative GIS data and other sources of data that you can layer in. We also can leverage the power of the cloud, because we are a cloud-hosted, cloud-native solution, to do some really interesting things like language detection and real-time language translation. So in this example, you can see the caller texted back in Spanish. Radius automatically detected that, it translated it, and it allows the telecommunicator to still type his or her message in English and have that translated on the fly back into Spanish in this case for the caller to understand. For any of us who have ever dealt with third-party language translation services, this can be a game changer. Those services are indispensable, and this is certainly not meant to be a replacement for them, but it can really decrease the amount of time it takes to start working with a caller and working with a caller in a language that they natively speak or that they speak fluently, providing more help, better help to more people than we ever have been able to before. So let's now talk about what Reinhard spoke about during the opening session, which is this brand new feature in Radius called Signals. I've talked about them at a high level, this Apple and Google integration, and what that means for us. But let's break that down in a little more detail because it's really exciting. I mean, when I heard that we could do some of this stuff and that we would be foraying into this, it was as exciting as it was when I saw phase 2 in action and I saw the things that phase 2 could bring to people. And I was just blown away. First and foremost, because the integration that we have with Apple and Google gives us the ability to see the location of a 911 caller before the phone ever rings at your PSAP. In some testing that we've done, this can be on the order of multiple seconds, 6, 7, 8 seconds before the phone even rings. That can be really useful because, as we know, even though it's a bit of a cliche, even we know, seconds matter and minutes even more. Anything we can do to get a jump on providing response more quickly buys us that time to devote to other pursuits and provide more response. It gives us a little more time to start processing that incident. So getting that and seeing it and seeing these locations pop up within your PSAP's service area as soon as someone dials 911 is really critically important. And they do pop in pretty quick. During some of our live testing, we saw that usually within about a second of someone actually dialing 911 on their handset, on their cell phone, it shows up. So let's talk about some use cases where this can be really useful. The first of 3 is, imagine a call taker is answering a 911 call about a shooting in progress. She can now see that there are more 911 calls coming in as she's handling this call in close proximity to the one that she's handling right now. And as those calls get answered, she can see who at her PSAP has answered them, giving her a lot of information that she may not have had before. The ability to understand what those calls relate to because of their geographic proximity, but also who is handling them, making it easier to coordinate response and easier to avoid duplication of information. It also affords us the ability to see if a 911 call is placed from our service area that's not in that area. Maybe it's a little further out. Maybe it doesn't relate to the shooting and it relates to something else. And if your policy allows you to handle that call as a special case, instead of continuing to answer all of the calls as they're coming in the queue, in the order they're coming in, that gives you the ability to perhaps provide a faster response to that person who is calling for something completely unrelated. The other case that I want to talk about is something I'm really excited about. Reinhard touched on this in his opening session, but I definitely want to spend more time talking about it. It's the ability to see the location of a call in your service area that has been placed in your service area, but it's been misrouted to another agency, or it's simply been answered by another agency, perhaps on purpose. So imagine that a local 911 center sees multiple pins on a highway inside of their service area, and they can see that those calls are being answered by highway patrol. That's really great, number one, because it gives you some heads up awareness that there's an event taking place in your local area, even if it's not truly within your service area because the highway patrol is meant to handle those calls. You get a jump on it. You know it. You would have the option of helping provide some quicker assistance, maybe dispatching some units out there. And you would also have the ability to be aware of that if that request for assistance came into you. So giving you that heads up time, giving you that early jump on things helps you provide quicker response. That may be minutes quicker, which is certainly a great thing. This can also be really useful to help you understand if someone dialed 911 from inside of your PSAP service area, but it was misrouted to another adjacent agency. You may not get that call transferred back to you for a few moments, a few minutes, but at least you know that the call has been placed and that it may be coming back to you. So again, you have that degree of heads up. And if the PSAP that answered that 911 call is also running RapidDeploy's Radius product or has our patented Edge device to receive the 911 alley spill, we can tell which PSAP answered that, and we can show that to you inside of Radius. So you don't just know blindly that this call was placed and somebody else picked it up, but you know exactly who picked it up. And that's a really big deal. So let's talk a little bit more about signals and what makes them different from 911 calls. We use these terms within our products, and it's important to draw a distinction between the two. Calls are exactly what we think of within 911. Someone dials 911 on their phone, and a call rings at the PSAP, and you answer it. Nothing different than that. Signals are a little bit different. Signals are sent by a device either on behalf of a human experiencing an emergency or that the device itself has just detected. So let's think about Apple and Google. Those things are signals because the phone's operating system literally detects that you are dialing 911 and on your behalf captures the device location and sends it in to RapidDeploy. We can extend that metaphor out to vehicles. So let's say you have a connected car that's using OnStar, and the car gets in a crash, airbags go off. All of these sensors on the vehicle detect that, and on behalf of the caller, a potential caller inside of the vehicle itself sends out a broadcast, sends out a data push saying there's been this crash. The airbags went off, the car was going 55 miles an hour, and it's rolled over, right? That is also a signal. If you had a IoT internet connected smoke detector and the smoke detector detected a rise in temperature and detected smoke, nothing stops it from emitting a signal to act as a red flag to say there's probably a fire happening here, right? Burglar alarms could do the same thing. The list goes on. So at RapidDeploy, we think of signals as being this really broad collection of potential things that could come into a 911 center. And for years, we've talked about this like fire hose of data that could be coming into a 911 center and making sure we don't overwhelm telecommunicators because they're busy enough the way it is. How can we kind of boil that whole ocean and make it manageable? And signals are our way of doing that and correlating those signals with 911 calls. So you see some pins on the map helping you understand the location, but you see the big picture of everything related to one another. It's also really important to not just talk about location when it comes to signals, but also the kinds of data that can be made available with signals. So Apple and Google provide some additional data, and we can capture that data with the signals, and we can provide that to a telecommunicator to enrich their understanding of an incident. So in this third example, imagine you receive a call, but the caller can't say anything. As a result of data from Apple, the telecommunicator can know that the caller has a medical condition because the caller's provided that information in their medical ID profile on their iPhone. That impairs the caller's ability to communicate verbally. So the telecommunicator could use our two-way SMS feature to start up a text conversation with the caller, but also do it in the language specified in the additional data so you know that the message you're typing is going to be able to be understood by the caller. You cut out a lot of steps and a lot of time, and you can get right to communicating with the caller. And I think it's absolutely a brilliant example of being able to take those different pieces of data and the different tools that exist and use them together creatively to significantly cut down on the amount of time it takes to provide response and provide better response. It's what we all really want to do. That data specifically from Apple and the medical ID feature and the emergency response area feature that Reinhard briefly touched on earlier this morning, can be really, really rich. And not every person that dials 911 from an iPhone is going to be providing data like this. And they may not provide all of the data. But just as an illustration, there is a lot of data that can be available. Certainly information about the call. Is it a voice call? And understanding exactly what kind of data is available. There could be information about the caller themselves, like their name, their age, medical conditions, height and weight of the particular caller, blood type and medications, various medical notes. The caller can provision emergency contact information into their phone as well. That's pretty useful because if you need to reach out to someone who may be able to provide assistance if you can't get a hold of this caller. Again, say the caller can't speak, the call dropped, you're still able to get this data. It's another way to reach out to folks. It may also come along with something called the emergency response area. This is a location that Apple may believe represents a possible location of where the caller might be, either at their work location or their home location. And there's a lot that goes into computing that and figuring out if the caller is there. But it's just another example of, where you might be able to send a responder to initiate a search to try to find a caller that isn't able to verbally verify where he or she is located. Google can provide some similar information like device language. And for some compatible Android devices, Google Pixel devices, they can actually detect if the cell phone believes it has been in a car accident. It can provide a timestamp of when that accident may have occurred, giving you just a little more information to work with if it's a situation where you can't tell all of that information just by speaking with the caller on the phone. So let's talk about the future and talk about what public safety mapping will become and the different ways that it's going to change from what we see today. We're already seeing things like RapidDeploy Radius, where we're fusing in data from multiple sources, not only signal sources, but GIS data, and we're expanding the notion of PSAT mapping. So it's not just a map, it's a communications tool. But where does it go from there? So again, signals aren't limited to just Google and Apple data pushes when the phones detect 911. That could be a connected car. It could be a panic button app, like the Rave Mobile Safety Panic Button app or the OnStar mobile app. It could be a variety of mobile apps that can, sense, of course, when someone hits the panic button inside of it and initiate a push out to a map like RapidDeploy Radius. They could even involve that little thing that kind of looks like it came out of Star Wars, which is a IoT connected flood gauge sensor, so that if there are streams or low-lying areas in your jurisdiction that you can perhaps see when those roads become flooded in a flash flood event, for example. The sources of this kind of data are almost limitless, and the ability to stream that in and get an early jump on what might be taking place in your service area is really important. We're going to see more of that happen in the future. So I think that's one of the big things that I want to highlight, is that we're really just beginning to scratch the surface on what's possible. Another example of this will be bringing in automated alarms. There are some agencies today that use technology in their CAD systems called ASAP to PSAP, which allows alarm companies to send automatically, digitally, notifications about alarms that occur within their service area. So instead of getting a physical phone call from the alarm company and having to create a manual CAD event within your system, it just shows up in CAD as an event that can be dispatched, handled just like any other CAD event. That's an example today, and that has been used for some time, of these signals being distributed through a network and landing out at a 911 center for automatic response. RapidDeploy is going to be working with ADT, the alarm company ADT, to do the very same thing, so that we can bring those into Radius in our CAD product, and that we can give telecommunicators just that early jump on what might be taking place during an emergency. If there is an intrusion detection system that goes off, or others. When we talk about maps, here's where it gets really interesting too. And a lot of that is driven by what we've seen in the past with location accuracy trends and what we're seeing now with location accuracy trends, driven in large part again by the FCC and that 6th report and order on wireless location accuracy. Maps will become three-dimensional. And this is happening today already. Business partners and companies out there like Geocom are developing super highly detailed indoor maps in 3 dimensions that can take a school, for example, and break it down floor by floor by floor, and not only show the specific floors, the specific rooms in the specific buildings, but show real rich infrastructure information, like exit doors, and then attribute whether or not that door is locked from both sides or just one side. Show the locations of fire extinguishers, shut-off valves, CCTV camera locations, all of those things, providing a tremendous wealth of information that has really never existed within PSAT mapping before. The fact it's going to go three-dimensional is driven precisely by the fact that people tend to call 911 from indoors, and we will now have the ability to get that plus or minus 3 meter z-axis information sent along with a 911 call. So we can take that, and instead of just displaying an elevation value as a number on an alley display, we can use it to estimate the floor someone might be calling on. And we can show the location of a caller not just as a pin on a 2D map, but as a sphere on a 3D map, really highlighting the location of where someone might be and giving a heck of a lot more situational awareness than we've ever had before. Not just showing in a three-dimensional space where someone is based on elevation, but what might be around that caller as well. We can extend it even further and use awareness of that space to provide indoor routing directions, like you see on the screenshot on the right-hand side. Being able to actually calculate directions on where to send responders, which door to send them through, which stairwells to take. If it's a really large location, that could be really confusing otherwise, and time-consuming to navigate within. I mean, one of my very earliest college software development internships, I worked at a corporation where we had 7,000 employees on staff in a large facility. And more times than I would care to admit, as a mapping guy, I got myself lost in the sea of cubicles in that building. It was ridiculous, and I cannot imagine being a first responder in an environment like that. So, even though these might be situations that you don't deal with on a day-to-day basis, again, having some additional tools in your toolbox to deal with this stuff, I think is a really fine goal to have. And this is exactly where the industry is going to be heading, so that we don't just have elevation data sitting there as a text value on an alley display, but we can actually do something really, really useful with it. Maps will become elevation aware outside of buildings. So not everybody dials 911 from the 44th floor of the Independent in downtown Austin, Texas. They may dial 911 from a rooftop, right? They may dial 911 from a bridge, right? And you may have situations that require analysis of maps in 3D. There's this really cool feature that our business partner Azure has, which is called this real-time line of sight analysis, where you can imagine, in this example, an active shooter that's shooting from near the top of a high rise. You might want to see where that active shooter can see and thereby shoot, and where they can't see. And if you have a 3D map with buildings that have accurate elevation, which are pretty easy to build using some special GIS data like LiDAR and other sources, you can calculate in real time where that person can see. So in this example, the green areas on that right-hand side map represent where that person can see. In fact, we have 2 people, right? So we've got 2 people in opposing locations in 2 different buildings. The green areas are where they can see. The yellow areas, maybe not so much. The red areas, they can't. That could be of very great usefulness to someone that's acting as an on-the-field, boots-on-the-ground first responder. Certainly useful for telecommunicators too. Again, hopefully not something we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Hopefully it's something we never deal with. But having these tools at the ready gives us the ability to provide much higher quality, much faster response than we've ever been able to before. And this is where it's heading. Maps will also become up to date. This is happening today. Um, Partners like Geocom are literally rolling out map updates for some customers on a nightly basis. We know we need to do this for next generation 911 because call routing is powered by GIS data in next generation 911. The emergency call routing function and its partner in crime, the location validation function, have to use GIS data to figure out where locations of callers are, if those locations are valid, and which PSAPs the calls should be routed to. So that data needs to be bulletproof. That data needs to be rock solid, and it needs to be up to date. Like, you can't push data once a month to a call routing system. It just doesn't work. Data changes too frequently, much less if you discover a problem in your GIS data. And it is patently unacceptable for a 911 call routing system to have fresher data than the maps that people actually look at when they have to figure out where a caller is. So we have to have maps that are up to date in the 911 centers, and we need to have a mechanism to keep them up to date. And this is literally what we're doing at RapidDeploy today. This example is one that I found in the state of Kansas, who's using RapidDeploy Radius. And just northeast of Wichita, Kansas. On the left-hand side, you see a map from a commercial provider. Got a nice farm field. Looks like they're doing some combining. If you look at the right-hand side, though, there is no more combining happening in that field. They have cut roads. They have built homes. And in fact, there are roads that haven't yet been captured in this aerial imagery that now exist because they've been digitized on the map as line work. This is an example of where a local GIS authority, either with the city or the county, can use their GIS data editing tools and their GIS data maintenance processes to create this map data, and in the case of Kansas, roll it up to the state, who grabs that data, coalesces it, stitches it into a statewide data set that they themselves use for provisioning to their NG911 system, but they make available to a product like Radius Plus in this case, through the use of Esri's ArcGIS Enterprise hosting solution. We literally connect to this through web services, so you don't have an army of people running around the state of Kansas with flash drives updating map data. So as soon as the local authority goes into their data set and sketches a road or adds an address point, they can publish that data, and as it's coalesced into the statewide data set and published, it is made immediately available to RapidDeploy without even having to refresh the browser. That's a really big deal, and that's where all maps are going to go. So whether or not you're using a local solution today that requires that thumb drive data update procedure, or you're using something like Radius Plus, the whole industry is moving in this direction. And as a GIS guy and as a 911 software guy, I couldn't be happier. It's incredibly refreshing to see where we're heading with this. So with that, I want to say thank you for joining me today and learning a little bit more about where mapping is heading and what the future of mapping means for 911 and public safety. Let's go ahead and see if we have any questions that we would like to answer today.
All right, we're coming back up. That was awesome. I love that journey in mapping. I don't see any questions. I do see somebody had commented in here when you were talking about getting the location information before the call actually comes in. That, you know, before they maybe could see it, but they had to guess where it was going, and they don't like the guesswork. And so this takes that guesswork out of there, and that's amazing. I'm putting your information here in the chat, so if people do have questions later on, they can go ahead and get a hold of you.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, and very much welcome any questions that y'all have. Always happy to hop on a call and chat about this kind of stuff. As many folks that know me know, I could talk for hours about this kind of stuff. So very much thank you. It was a treat to be able to share a little bit about what we're doing here at RapidDeploy in this particular space and talk about where I think the future is heading. So thanks again.
It's so exciting, and I think the line level dispatchers will appreciate it as well, because all of those data points are in one spot, right? There's no logging into multiple different applications. It's just it does create that more efficient response that I think everybody wants.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for being here. Next session for us today is with the Denise Amber Lee Foundation. Tina DeCola is going to be chatting about peer support, and that begins, I believe, at 10 a.m. So that'll be the next session. Remember, the schedule is up in the left-hand corner of your screen, and you can select the session that you want to enter. And thanks again, Brooks. We'll see you later.
All right, sounds good. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.